I never thought camping on my own property would land 12 people in federal prison. Here's how it began. 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, and I'm dead asleep in my tent when flashlights explode across my face. "Sir, step out and show us some ID. We got a call about suspicious activity." I'm lying there in my sleeping bag, on land my family's owned since 1952, completely confused. Turns out some woman saw my tent and called 911, convinced I was a dangerous vagrant squatting by the lake. The thing is, this property has been in my family since before there was even a neighborhood here, before there was an HOA, before this woman even existed in our community. But she wasn't backing down. Even after the deputies apologized and left, embarrassed as hell, she kept pushing, kept threatening, kept making my life absolute misery. She had no idea who she was messing with, and she definitely had no idea what I was about to uncover about her and her corrupt little friends. What would you do if someone harassed you on your own property? Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next changed everything. Let me back up and tell you how I walked into this nightmare. 6 months ago, I was Marcus Thompson, just another veteran trying to figure out civilian life after 20 years as an Army Corps engineer. Then my grandfather died and left me his cabin. This wasn't some fancy lakefront mansion. It was a rough-hewn log cabin he built with his own hands in 1952, sitting on 5 pristine acres. The moment I opened that creaky door, the smell of cedar logs mixed with lake water hit me like a memory. I was home. My grandfather was a legend around here. Local fishing guide for 40 years, taught half the county how to read water and tie flies. Every 4th of July, he'd throw legendary fish fries where he'd feed anyone who showed up hungry. The whole community would gather on our beach, and you could smell the wood smoke and fried bass for miles. But more importantly, he never backed down from bullies. Back in the 80s, some developer tried to buy out all the lakefront families for condos. Grandfather rallied the neighbors and sent those suits packing with their tails between their legs. "Marcus," he used to tell me, gripping my shoulder with those weathered hands, "some fights choose you. When they do, you finish what you started." I spent my first week just soaking it all in. The sound of loons calling across the water at dawn, the crunch of pine needles under my boots as I walked the property line. The rough texture of those hand-hewn logs brought back memories of helping grandfather with maintenance every summer. That's when I noticed something weird. Fresh survey stakes that didn't match grandfather's old boundary markers. Turns out, a whole development had sprouted up since my last visit 15 years ago. Lakeshore Estates, McMansions crammed onto postage stamp lots with HOA fees that could buy a used car. But my property? It sat on this little peninsula, completely separate from their perfect little suburb, like an island of authenticity in a sea of suburban conformity. That's when I met the queen bee herself. Picture the most entitled person you've ever met, stuff her into a white Lexus SUV and give her a clipboard. Priscilla Whitmore pulled into my driveway like she owned the place, stepped out in her spotless white outfit, even her shoes were pristine, and announced herself as HOA president for this community. "I'm here to discuss bringing your property into compliance with our standards," she said, eyeing my grandfather's cabin like it was a condemned crack house. I almost choked on my morning coffee. "Ma'am, my property's not part of your HOA, never has been." Her plastic smile cracked slightly. "Mr. Thompson, all lakefront properties fall under our covenants. It's about maintaining property values and community aesthetics." The way she spit out aesthetics, while staring at my family's legacy, told me everything. This city transplant had decided our entire lake needed to match her vision of suburban perfection. Grandfather's rustic cabin apparently didn't make the cut. That night, I set up my old army tent on the beach. Figured I'd honor grandfather's memory by camping under the stars like he taught me. The texture of pine needles under my sleeping bag brought back childhood memories of learning to fish these waters. Grandfather's patient voice explaining how to read the ripples. Should have been peaceful. Instead, I got those flashlights at 2 a.m. But here's where it gets interesting. After the deputies left, embarrassed as hell by the way, Priscilla showed up bright and early the next morning. Clipboard in hand, attitude cranked to 11. "Mr. Thompson, camping without permits violates multiple community ordinances. You'll be receiving formal violation notices." I looked at her standing there on my property, threatening me with her made-up rules, and something clicked. This wasn't about permits or community standards. This was about control, about erasing everything my grandfather built, and Priscilla Whitmore had just picked a fight with the wrong veteran. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox that made my blood boil. Official HOA letterhead, fancy legal language, and a demand for my presence at an emergency community meeting to discuss my flagrant violations of established community standards. The meeting was Thursday night at their sterile community center. I showed up in my work boots and jeans, curious to see what kind of performance Priscilla had planned. The smell of industrial carpet cleaner and cheap coffee hit me as I walked in. The place was packed with maybe 15 uncomfortable-looking neighbors. But what really caught my attention was the guy in an ill-fitting suit standing next to Priscilla like some kind of government backup. "Before we begin," Priscilla announced with theatrical flair, "I'd like everyone to meet my husband, Robert Whitmore. He works for the county zoning office and has graciously agreed to provide official guidance on enforcement matters." My Army training kicked in immediately. I remembered reading about conflicts of interest in my military ethics courses. When public officials use their position to benefit private interests, that's textbook corruption. But I kept quiet and waited to see how deep this rabbit hole went. Priscilla fired up her PowerPoint like she was presenting quarterly earnings. But here's where things got weird. Every single slide showed photos of my property, my dock, my cabin, my beach, my driveway. She'd been conducting surveillance on me for weeks like I was some kind of terrorist threat. "As you clearly see," she said, clicking through pictures of my tent, "unauthorized temporary structures create liability issues and severely impact community aesthetics." The neighbors were fidgeting like kids in detention. You could cut the tension with a knife. Everyone knew this was wrong, but nobody wanted to be the first to speak up. Then came the knockout punch. Mr. Thompson must sign this retroactive compliance agreement, which includes $2,000 in back fees plus monthly dues going forward. Her husband stepped up with his government authority voice. "The county fully supports HOA initiatives to maintain community standards. We have extensive enforcement tools for uncooperative property owners." That's when I'd heard enough. I stood up slowly, walked to the front, and spread my surveyor's map and property deed across their presentation table. The papers rustled in the dead silence. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, projecting my voice to the back row, "let's establish some basic legal facts here." I traced the property boundaries with my finger. "My family's land ends here. Your HOA jurisdiction starts way over there. This property predates your development by 4 decades and has never been subject to your authority." The room went cemetery quiet except for the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. I held up grandfather's deed. "Continuous family ownership since 1952. Your HOA incorporated in 1995. You cannot retroactively claim control over property you never had rights to." Priscilla's face flushed red. "Community standards supersede individual property claims when neighborhood values are at stake." Her husband tried to sound official. "Multiple enforcement mechanisms exist for addressing nuisance violations." But I turned to address the neighbors directly. "How many of you realized your HOA president has been demanding fees for property she has zero legal authority over?" Then I dropped the real bomb. "I'm curious what other creative charges you've been paying that might not survive legal scrutiny." That's when the dam broke. Whispers started spreading like wildfire, people comparing notes about mysterious assessments and unexplained fee increases. Dorothy, an elderly woman in the third row, raised her weathered hand. "We paid $1,500 for lake maintenance last year. I walk that shoreline every day. Haven't seen one improvement." More hands shot up. Questions about special assessments for projects that never happened. Fees for services nobody could identify. The crowd was getting agitated and Priscilla was losing control fast. "This meeting is about Mr. Thompson's violations," she snapped, "not unfounded complaints about HOA management." I gathered my documents with deliberate calm. Actually, this meeting just became very educational. If Mrs. Whitmore claims authority she doesn't legally possess, every decision she's made as your president deserves serious scrutiny. The room erupted in conversations, neighbors finally comparing experiences they'd been suffering through alone. Priscilla stormed out, her husband scurrying behind her like a scared puppy. Dorothy approached me afterward, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Your grandfather warned us about people like her 20 years ago, said carpetbaggers would keep trying to control what wasn't theirs." Driving home, listening to gravel crunch under my tires, I realized Priscilla had made a fatal mistake. She'd turned a simple property dispute into a public examination of her entire operation. This wasn't about camping anymore. This was about power, money, and corruption. And she just handed me the keys to bringing down her whole empire. Priscilla's revenge came swift and vicious. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp, a county code enforcement truck rumbled into my driveway like a tank rolling into occupied territory. The inspector was a nervous, sweaty guy who wouldn't make eye contact. He shoved an official notice at me citing anonymous complaints about my septic system, dock permits, and cabin electrical work. Everything that had been perfectly legal under grandfathered protections for 70 years. "Need to see permits for all structures," he mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. 30 days to comply or face serious penalties. The estimated costs made my jaw drop. nearly $10,000 to update systems that had been working fine since Eisenhower was president. But here's where it got interesting. This nervous wreck actually let something slip. Mrs. Whitmore personally flagged this property for priority inspection, he said, then immediately looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Bingo. Now I knew exactly how this game was being played. From my military days overseas, I recognized this playbook. Corrupt local officials using government power to shake down anyone who wouldn't play ball. The harassment escalated throughout that week like clockwork. Tuesday morning brought the HOA landscaping crew accidentally dumping a mountain of grass clippings all over my pristine beach. The smell of rotting vegetation cooking in the summer heat was absolutely revolting. When I called to complain, they claimed it was a routing error and would get cleaned up when schedules permitted. Wednesday delivered emergency maintenance at 6 a.m. Leaf blowers and hedge trimmers positioned strategically to blast noise directly through my bedroom windows for 3 straight hours. The crew just shrugged when I confronted them, following orders, nothing personal. Thursday brought fish and game officers responding to reports of illegal camping and hunting activity. They were embarrassed when they realized how bogus the complaints were, but someone was clearly working through a systematic harassment checklist. By Friday, even my mail delivery had become problematic. The postal worker admitted someone kept calling about access issues to my mailbox, forcing them to hold my mail for pickup downtown. But Priscilla had seriously underestimated who she was messing with. My Corps of Engineers background had taught me something valuable. When someone attacks your infrastructure, you research theirs and find the weak points. I started by requesting a full environmental impact study for the lake area. 20 years of environmental engineering experience meant I knew exactly what to look for and how to request it legitimately. That's when I hit the mother lode. The environmental records showed that Lakeshore Estates had violated multiple federal wetlands protection laws during construction. I'm talking serious violations, the kind that trigger EPA enforcement actions and massive fines. Back in my Army days, I'd learned that document fraud usually involves consistent patterns across multiple violations. So I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for all county HOA correspondence over 5 years. Public records had to be disclosed whether they liked it or not. The email trail I uncovered was absolutely damning. Message after message showing coordination between Priscilla's husband and other county officials to expedite HOA requests while creating bureaucratic nightmares for independent property owners. They were literally using taxpayer-funded government resources to wage war against citizens who wouldn't join their little club. Dorothy invited me for coffee and revealed the true scope of this operation. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she poured tea and told me about the systematic destruction of our community. The Hendersons were here 40 years, she said, her voice heavy with sadness. After 8 months of manufactured violations and legal harassment, they sold for half their property's worth just to escape. She rattled off names. The Millers, the Johnsons, 3 other longtime families driven out through coordinated government harassment campaigns. Each property sold below market value to buyers with mysterious connections to Lakeshore Estates. I started documenting everything with military precision. Every interaction, every official visit, every suspicious coincidence went into my evidence file. Pattern recognition had been crucial in identifying enemy operations overseas. Same principles applied here. Dorothy connected me with other targeted families who'd been afraid to speak up alone. Our informal coffee meetings revealed the full scope of what was happening. Systematic ethnic and economic cleansing disguised as community improvement. The smoking gun came when I cross-referenced property sales records with county violation reports. Every single forced sale happened within 6 months of sudden discovery of code violations that had been ignored for decades. But I couldn't move too fast. Military operations succeed through careful intelligence gathering and strategic timing. If I tipped my hand too early, they'd destroy evidence and scatter like roaches when the lights come on. Time to start building an airtight case that would bring down this entire corrupt network. 2 weeks later, Priscilla declared total war. The certified letter in my mailbox made my hands shake with rage. A demand for $15,000 and 20 years of unpaid HOA dues, with a 10-day deadline before property liens would be filed. Attached was a photocopied document that made my blood run cold. An alleged HOA membership agreement from 1995 bearing my grandfather's signature. The problem? My grandfather died in 2019, and I'd handled every piece of his paperwork. He'd never signed anything related to the HOA. I knew this absolutely. But what really triggered my alarm was how wrong the document looked. Back in combat zones, forged documents could get soldiers killed, so we'd been trained in basic analysis. This signature had different ink color, inconsistent pen pressure, and letter formations that didn't match grandfather's natural writing style. The paper looked too crisp for a 30-year-old document, and the ink had that chemical sheen you see in fresh ballpoint pens. The smell of fresh printer toner still clung to the pages. Another dead giveaway that this was recently fabricated. Priscilla wasn't just harassing me anymore.